This video is to talk about environmental variables and how an enterprise architect needs to think about them with regards to how they affect the enterprise. One of the things to remember is that an enterprise cannot stand by itself. It is always interacting with the outside environment. In fact, when you think about it, what an enterprise is a group of complex solutions designed to figure out how to interact with these external variables, the environmental variables. Now, typically what you'll find in MBA schools is that they teach that there's 5 different types of environmental variables. Some different schools say 7, it depends on which school, but typically what you'll see are political, economic, technical, social, and competitive environmental variables. These variables will all affect the enterprise. Some directly, but a competitor, for example, never directly interacts with the enterprise. It'll affect the other environmental variables. So I would consider the competitor more as an indirect environmental variable. One thing to remember about these is that they also affect all the other variables. So a government can, through its regulation, affect your customer. So don't think that it's just a one-to-one relationship. You will get your environmental variables affecting each other right across the board. The other thing to remember is that typically you're not going to get a pure environmental variable. What you are going to get is something, and quite often you'll get, is something that's a combination of. So take, for example, a central bank from a country. That is something that, would you view that as a political organization? Remember, it's doing the bidding of the government of the day, of that political entity. Would you view it as economic? Because remember, its policies will affect the price of the currency of that particular country. Another example that I have on this sheet is, say, Facebook. Facebook affects the social side of things using technology. So is Facebook a social environmental variable, or is it a technical one? So these are the things that you need to think about. Now, when you look at these variables, you've got to remember that this is typically never going to be a two-dimensional type model. You're typically going to see this from a 3 dimensions. So the next part I will do is I'll show you a model that I created using SketchUp as a 3-dimensional model for thinking about environmental variables. In this model, which I created in SketchUp, what I tried to do is show that the enterprise and how the environmental variables will interact with it. So you'll notice that remember I was showing you in the previous picture how the competitor was sitting up above. Well, the thing to remember with environmental variables is not only do you have the environmental variables that you have to consider, your competitor also has environmental variables to think about. So in this case, for example, human resources, government, customers, vendors. By the way, you'll notice I say human resources. Your first thought is, but that's an internal organization. True, but the employees of the company are themselves external variables. Because remember, they will move from company to company based on the needs of their family or themselves. So you need to think of employees as an external variable. So let's move that competitor over, and now all of a sudden you're seeing how the competitor can be affecting the variables of your enterprise, but it's also reacting to its own variables. If the competitor and the enterprise are exactly in the same market, which typically does not occur, but if they were, they'd have the exact same variables. But since most enterprises are unique, then that means their external variables, their environmental variables, are also going to be unique. Now remember, when you think of these things, these are also organizations. As a result, they are going to have their own environmental variables. So in this video, you'll see what I've done is I've said the customers, they have their environmental variables. What ends up happening is you start to see a very molecular point of view of the way these things all interact, which I thought was really neat. And I hadn't thought about that until I started creating this and playing around with this. When you look at environmental variables outside your enterprise, you've got to remember the enterprise is one of many things, and everything outside will affect it. I remember in one of the blogs, somebody had left a comment talking about the enterprise as a living organism. I would suggest, just looking at this, that you're almost talking more molecular in nature as opposed to anatomical in nature. But that's beside the point. The thing that I want you to take away from this is that the enterprise is affected by variables, and it's a collection of solutions that has to deal with how these external variables work together.